Hey there. So we're going to continue my series, if you haven't seen the other ones, kind of going through the Mulvey or BX or 1981 Dungeons and Dragons basic book. In the other two times I did this, I kind of went through the examples of combat and examples of exploration to kind of show you or talk about kind of what I learned. We started playing, myself and my friend Steven, when we were about 9 years old, and we kind of taught ourselves to play. I guess traditionally people say, back in the day, you couldn't learn or you didn't learn unless uh, people taught you. Well, we taught ourselves. We got the box sets for Christmas, and I have a feeling that a lot of people learn this way. So I think the idea that like you had to have somebody teach you might have been a bit of a myth. But anyways, I think this book does a great job at teaching people, and I think it gives you a really good idea of the flavor of how the tables were, how it was played at the table back then. We're getting into the section now called Dungeon Mastering as a Fine Art, which is right after the exploration example. This is a little bit longer. It's 2 pages. And I might have a lot to say, so maybe this will be 2 videos. Who knows? We'll go through this though, and we'll kind of again, I'll give you my thoughts on it, and I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. When you're looking at this or reading this, are you just like, huh? Or are you like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, or oh, I still do that? Because I feel like that happens to me a lot. So let's take a look. So I've got the PDF here. You can get this on Drive Through RPG. And again, I'm on page B60 if you are following along. All right, so Dungeon Mastering as a Fine Art. The success of the adventure depends on the DM and his or her creation, the dungeon. Remember that in B, so the basic book, this is all about dungeon exploration. There's nothing in here about traveling to and from the dungeon. It's kind of assumed that you're only going to be in dungeons for this particular book. So it's all about that for the most part. The DM should have a dungeon carefully mapped out before play begins. I actually did a video on making an adventure using this book, so put a link to that as well. Even so, the DM will quickly find that it's impossible to predict every possibility. After all, there are several players and only one DM. Isn't that the truth? It's not unusual for players to find a solution or pose a new problem that DM has not even thought of. It's very important for the DM to be flexible. This is great advice. Whether you're running a game in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons now, or you're running OSR stuff, or any system you're running in, flexibility is going to make it go a lot smoother. It's important the DM be fair, judging everything without favoring one side or the other. True. The DM is there to see the adventure is interesting, that everybody enjoys the game. D&D is not a contest between the DM and the players. I don't know how many times this comes up all the time on internet forums about these like adversarial DMs and whatever. Right from the beginning, they're telling you this is not how you should be doing it. And I think that's really important. That it's so when anybody tells you, well, that's how they used to do it. Well, this is pretty early into the existence of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's literally telling you not to. I think you have to look at attitudes of things, because there are a couple things in here that I think kind of we'll talk about that. Because you will find, like for instance, that especially in AD&D, where the Dungeon Master guy guys will specifically point out ways to kind of like jabs at the players. But I really feel like that's more of in a fun way to challenge them, and not so much as in, oh, I'm going to kill you. I mean, the DM can easily destroy a party. They don't need special rules to do that. It put monsters that are too powerful. Anyways, the DM should do his or her part to act impartially when taking the part of the monsters or handling disputes between characters. Right, that's pretty straightforward. And then we've got some actually not bullet points, they're bolded, areas here to kind of go over some things that might happen, right? That's not in the rules, right? The players will often surprise the DM by doing the unexpected. Yes, they will. And that's what makes this great. Don't panic. When this happens, DM should make sure everything is done in the order given by the outline or sequence of events being used. So like if you're in combat, there's that sequence, or your exploration turns. Minor details may be made up as needed to keep the game moving, right? It's telling you right off the bat. Just rulings over rules, right? That is a popular term people use these days. All DMs learn how to handle both new ideas and unusual actions quickly and with imagination. So you'll learn it. Just if you're rusty at first, it just takes some practice. The more you play, the more you'll be loose. Quite often, DM can decide on a solution to a player's actions not covered by these rules. Other times, a problem may have no simple solution, and then it gives some options here. One quick way for a DM to decide whether a solution will work is by imagining this situation, then choosing a percentage chances for different possibilities. For example, suppose a DM is running a combat that's taking place on the ledge next to an unexplored chasm. One player suddenly decides his character has no chance to survive the combat, and the player announces, my character wants to jump into the chasm to escape. So they don't know how deep this chasm is. They don't know what's at the bottom, right? They just want to jump in. And you're just like, oh. There may be a chance you will fall to a nearby ledge or land in a pool of water at the bottom of the chasm. The DM thinks, thinks about the dungeon for a minute, remembers there's an underground river, blah, blah. So it goes into, I'm not going to figure out those. But essentially what they say is he makes a percentage chance, only a 2% chance. But he does tell the player, this is the part that is important. Looking down to the chasm, your character can estimate that he has a 98% chance of dying. No saving throw if he jumps. If you decide the character jumps, roll percentile dice. I'll say it eventually. A result of 99 or 100 will mean your character lives. Any other result will mean that he will die in the attempt. Do you still want to jump? This is super important. This is a key to kind of, anyways, how I run games. Whenever somebody wants to do something, especially if it's not super clear as to what their chances are, you need to spell that out. I get the whole immersion thing, and you can say, like, the pit looks very dark. You don't know what could be down there. There might be. Okay, that's cool for flavor, and you do all that, and that's part of the fun of the game. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty and the player's about to pick up dice, you need to tell them what that percentage is. Because the words like, it's deep or dark, or you might hear water below, might mean something totally different to them than it does to you. Here, there's only a 2% chance they're going to survive. So you want to make that clear before they go ahead and jump, right? That's super important, and yeah, I 100% agree with that. Next point. There's always a chance. The DM may want to base a character's chance of doing something on his or her ability scores, right? Strength, dexterity, and so forth. To perform a difficult task, such as climbing up a rope or thinking of a forgotten clue, right? The player should roll the ability score or less on a d20. The DM may give a bonus of penalty on the roll depending on the difficulty of the action. -4 for simple tasks, +4 for difficult ones. They mean to the because they're trying to roll below your ability score, right? So a penalty to the roll, making the roll lower, is better. A roll of 1 should always succeed. A roll of 20 should always fail. Now, I will point out that looking at this, it does start off by saying there's always a chance. I don't know that is the case. I think what they're saying here is if it's just something like a mechanical thing where it shouldn't just be automatic that they can, like, say, climb the rope, but there's no rule really about climbing ropes. Here's just a quick way to deal with it. I do think you can get bogged down in two things: adding too many rolls where it's not needed, and also allowing things that maybe just aren't possible. I don't think that the phrase "there's always a chance" is 100% true. I think if there's no chance, you can just say that, and I don't think that's a problem. But by the way, the rolling under ability score is something that, is very common. I use that a lot. I mean, it's probably one of the most common, like, mechanics outside the normal rules that I use. All right, the DM is the boss. Uh-oh. Bom, bom, bom. Let's see. DM decides how these rules will be used in the game. A good DM talks about problem areas with the players. See, so again, if you just read the statement, right, the DM is the boss, someone who didn't read the statement, D&D is not a contest between the DM and the players, might take this as, I'm the boss, blow up. But that's not what this is saying, per se. What he says is the DM decides how these rules will be used in the game. A good DM talks about problem areas with the players and considers reasonable requests by them. The players should realize, however, that the final decision is the DM's, not theirs, and not this booklet's, right? Not the rules, but the DM, because they're the arbiter of the rules. So, but a good DM is going to listen to the argument of the player or the discussion of the player. An example of this would be that just happened. Just use this would be this. Well, by the time this goes live, it'll be a couple weeks ago probably. We were playing Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers, and Crystal's character wanted to use an ability they had to charge, and then they gave him extra ability or extra bonus on damage or something. And they were using a sword, and I was like, I don't think you can charge with a sword. I really see charge as being something more that a spear should be used or whatever. So I allowed it for that moment because we already done it. But I said, I think in the future you're not going to be able to charge with the sword. Then when the game is over, she said to me, hey, I get what you mean, and I understand your point of view on that, but this is like a special ability of my character, and, I'm a sword-wielding character, and I have, I used my mastery point, we're playing Astonishing Swordsman, so they have a sword master. It's like I can't use my ability with the weapon of choice that I want to use for my character. So, yeah, I said, you know what? Let me think about it, and we kind of looked at it. I said, yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be that you can only charge with the spear. I just thought, in my mind, that's what I think. There's no rule that says that that's 100%, and maybe there is a rule, who knows? But I said you can charge with your sword because it makes more flavor for your character. So discussing it with the player and not just saying it's my rule is how I operate. Sometimes though I will just say no, I don't think that's really the case. I'm sorry, I think that's just not going to work. But in this case, it really would have been, in a sense, not cool, for her to not be able to use her ability. So I was like, well, at least I said, well, actually, I think what I said was, you can charge with your sword to use that ability. That was kind of my ruling at that moment. Whether or not I allow everybody to charge with swords, I'm still up in the air about that. Anyways, it does say here, though, the DM should make a temporary decision and talk it over after the adventure, which is basically what we did. If the player disagrees strongly enough, they might quit the game, So you kind of want to have that conversation. And it does say it's up to the DM to create an adventure the players can enjoy. And that's really what I thought. I thought, it doesn't change that much to allow this character to charge with a sword when it makes the game more enjoyable for them. It doesn't really make them overpowered. It's totally fine, So sometimes you got to be loose, right? Everyone is here to have fun. Well, that's the truth. The DM should make the adventure seem as real to the players as possible. All should avoid getting stuck in long discussions about rules and procedures. The game should move along with humor as well as excitement. I agree with that. That's more of like a general statement. I think the idea that everybody's here to have fun. Like, if you keep stopping, I mean, unless you are having fun by like, there are certain players that love to like go into the intricate parts of the rules, but unless both the DM and those players really like, every player at the table likes that, you don't want to spend a lot of time on that stuff. It'll take away from fun from the other players, and everyone is there, right? You're a group, so you have to kind of, everybody has to sacrifice a little bit of maybe what they would prefer to do, so that everybody can do the stuff that everybody likes. Everything is balanced. Oh no, all the old school Renaissance people are gonna be like, old school D&D wasn't balanced. Everything's balanced. The DM should try to maintain the balance of play. Treasure should be balanced by the dangers. Some groups prefer adventures where advancement between levels is swift. In such a case, treasure in general is greater, but the monsters should be tougher, right? That's what I mean by balance, right? Tougher monsters equal better rewards. Because, remember, in this game, you're getting experience points for treasure, not for killing the monsters, right? So, if you want to advance faster and you want to just do a lot of combats and get a lot of treasure and advance and become more powerful, then the DM should make that the case. Everybody should play. I mean, everybody should have fun. But it does say here, other groups prefer adventures where character development is more important and advancement is slower. So you're going to do more role play. You're going to do other stuff. And these kind of things, and that's fun, right? Everything is kind of balanced out. If you're not going to go up as fast in levels, but it's not going to be as dangerous, right? Your characters will be more likely to live longer because you're not going to be fighting really super tough monsters every single time. Where am I? If the monsters are too tough, if the parties are reduced to too many deaths, then few characters will ever reach higher levels, right? So you got to kind of balance all this out. The demon should keep in mind the further supplements detail characters up to 36 level. That's TSR selling you the rest of their books. I will. It says it should be very difficult for characters to attend this level, but it should not be impossible. Now, I will say, because they started over with BECME, that BX only actually goes to 14, and a lot of people that like to play this version of Basic do only play to 14th level or below. So, I mean, that's actually an interesting thing. But I do think, right, and they actually, somewhere in here, I believe, in the experience points buff, it does talk about how quickly they should go up in levels, and I think it's pretty good. I think if you base your numbers on what they recommend, most people are happy there. You don't want to go through like a year of playing and go up one level, because that would be, people want to get better, right? It's mostly an issue for like magic users and clerics that gain spells, and I guess thieves to get better thieves abilities. A fighter doesn't change that much; they just get more hit points. But if you're playing a game where it's not combat anyways, that's not going to be a big deal for them. Their character will stay the same. Anyways, your character doesn't know that. A player should not allow his character to act on information the character has no way of knowing. For example, attacking an NPC because the NPC killed a previous character run by that player, even though the NPC and the current character have never met. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the ultimate in what they call metagaming, right? Now, yeah, yeah, I'm not loving some of this is written here. So, first of all, I think that's weird, but I don't think anybody I play with would really do that. But you never know. If a player gets careless about this, the DM should remind them. The DM may, in addition, forbid certain actions to the characters involved. This is where it gets a little bit where people are like, oh, forbid that action. But at the same time, if you're just like, oh, I'm going to stab that guy in the face, and you're just like, why would you stab somebody you don't know? And you know that, like, they're doing it because that guy killed their last character. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't like the word forbid here because I feel like I wouldn't do that, but I would definitely have a conversation with them. And in fact, it says that here. The DM should make it clear to the players before the adventure begins that the characters may not act on information they don't have. And it'll save lots of time later. I agree with that. I think that if you play with players who really get into the role playing and want to play their characters, they're not going to do that anyways. You know, I mean, players will develop habits. Nikki is afraid of all old men because she's been tricked by so many in the games. Not all of them are bad though. But no, I mean, players will do that, and that's just going to happen. You can't really avoid that. But the idea of being like, okay, well, they killed my last character, so if you don't know that, then, if your character doesn't know that, then there's no way that you should know. And then we have some optional suggestions. So let's keep going. Mapping. Mapping during the adventure can sometimes be a difficult task. One way to save mapping time is to describe map in terms of squares rather than feet. So just talking about that, that's whatever. I just use feet. I don't think it's really a big deal. Whenever the characters are expected to know the shape of a dungeon, the DM can draw the outline. That's fine. I mean, this is all just whatever. I don't think there's anything really super interesting there. I mean, I think it's worth reading if you get the book, but I don't think there's anything really worth talking about. This is good, though. Monster descriptions. When the characters first encounter monsters, the DM should describe what the monster looks like instead of merely giving the name of the monster. The players will eventually recognize monsters by their descriptions. This is the ideal of GMing, I think. You don't want to really say it's an orc, although sometimes it's really hard to not just do that. So, even after all these years, I still say it's an orc sometimes. I mean, I think once they know it's an orc, what I usually do is I kind of think about whether or not they would know what something is. And then I'll tell them if it's something. Monster hit points. The DM should never really hit points to the monsters. That's true enough. It's enough to tell the players how a monster reacts to a successful attack. For example, it's bleeding from a number of wounds and staggering a bit, but still fighting. The player should not know the level of an NPC unless they've adventured with him, are also true. And I can say that I've encountered this, especially in 5th edition, where people have known the bad guy's level based on things they did because stuff is so structured. It's like, hold on, that warlock used this many rays, so they're this level. Yeah, that's kind of meta information, and as a player, you really should just try not to act on that. I think that's really kind of bad. Surprise. When a monster attacks by surprise, the DM does not need to describe the monster. I agree with that, right? They should describe the attack. From out of the dark shadows, Morgan Iron will suddenly feels a paw reach out and claw her leg. Oh man, don't kill Morgan. She takes 3 points of damage. Of course, the monster should be described after the surprise round is over. Continuing the example, you then see by the flickering torchlight a huge bear-like creature with a head like a great bird is charging at you. Oh man. You know what that is. They're not going to be in a good place there. If the party had seen an owlbear before, it could just be named. However, the mysterious appearance of a unknown monster is part of the thrill of the game. I agree with that. And it's one of the things I kind of really enjoy when playing with people who have never played before, especially the more oddball monsters. They just don't know what it is, and it's so fun. But, unfortunately, the longer we play, we start to know all the different monsters. You can't erase that from our memories, unfortunately. Magic items. When describing magical treasure items, the DM should only do so in general terms. For example, a ring should be mentioned, not a ring of invisibility. That's pretty common sense. But, maybe it's not common sense if you've never played before. Characters must experiment to find out what the item does. This I really love. I hate the idea, and the players do it all the time, and it bothers me to no end as a GM. I hate it when they're just like, I want to bring it someplace to be identified. Just freaking put the ring on. Come on. Sorry. But that's part of it, right? You're discovering this thing. Sometimes maybe not. If it's like, I'm not saying they should do it to everything, but part of this is you are discovering things. In fantastical stories, that's what happens, right? People find weird things and they experiment with them, and that's part of what D&D is. I think the idea of like we're just going to collect everything in a sack and then bring it to a magic user in town to be identified is kind of a cop out. So I agree with that. They should test it. Magic weapons and armor usually reveal their true nature after being used in combat. Yeah, to be honest, I always forget. So generally speaking, once they kind of have taken up and kind of swung it around and used it uh, at all, if it's like cursed or something, I'm just gonna basically, they've used it. I'm not gonna wait till they actually use it to kill something, and I would usually tell people pretty much right away as soon as they use the weapon what it is. Mostly because I don't want to forget, and I feel really bad too because one time I was trying to be all slick about it, and I think it was to Young's character. I gave him a sword, and it was actually +1 plus 3 against whatever kind of creature. And I totally didn't tell him that because I was like, "Oh, it's a magical sword," and he used it the first combat, and I was like, "Yeah, it's +1," because he was fighting whatever skeleton, and it wasn't the creature. And then later in the adventure, that creature came out, and he was just adding +1 because I didn't think to remind him, or I didn't remind myself that it's +3 against this creature. So that's why I just tell people now, because I always forget. If you're really good at keeping track of stuff, then it's fun not to tell people, but I always forget. Dividing magical treasure. Well, it's not the DM's job to divide treasure between the players, it's true. The DM may offer suggestions. Non-magical treasure is usually divided evenly among all surviving players. That's pretty generally how I do it. Magical treasures may be divided by the player's choice, so by having each roll a percentile die. That's also a good thing. I mean, luckily, most groups kind of think about who should have what, even though you kind of want it. It's like most groups think strategically and give the items that are best suited to different people. But if there's a chance, you could have a roll off. If there's like an up in the air, if two people want something, that seems fair enough. It's not a bad way of deciding it. Let the dice decide. Player. Oh, this is what I was gonna say. Player advancement. If no one has reached second level of experience in 3 or 4 adventures, the DM should consider giving more treasure. If most of the players have reached third level experience by this time, the DM should consider cutting down the amount of treasure or increasing the toughness of the monsters. So what this tells me is, in 3 or 4 adventures, somebody should get to that level. So what I generally keep as track, and I think I've talked about this before in the XP for Gold, I think a fighter takes 2,000 experience points. So I try to figure that they will get enough experience points that a fighter will get to 4th level. We'll get to first, go up a level. To second level, I guess, in 4 adventures, which means that a thief will get there sooner, and so will a cleric. In fact, usually it works out that a thief or a cleric oftentimes gets to 3rd level by the time most people get to 2nd, because they level up faster unless they die. But yeah, this is basically goes back to that balance part, right? You might want them to level up really quickly. I mean, maybe you're playing literally a 5 or 6 session mini campaign, and you want them to start from 1st and get to 3rd by the time they fight the final monster. So you could do that in theory, right? But generally speaking, you want to. That seems like a good place to put it, and I agree with that. Grudges. Occasionally, a grudge develops between characters. This is going to be an interesting one. A small grudge can often make the game more interesting, particularly if the grudge develops because the players are playing their character roles well. This is the important part. If you're playing with people that can't keep that separate, and they actually are getting like out of game, the player is getting upset by it. I think as a GM, if the other player that's kind of like has the grudge with them doesn't see that, maybe it's not so obvious to them for whatever reasons when you're involved in something that's not that obvious, I think it is your place to step in there outside of a game and say, hey, we should probably step back on this because maybe this is, going to cause problems. This is not the advice they give, though, I don't think so. Let's keep reading. Let's see. For example, a lawful character might have a grudge with the chaotic character who slew a prisoner after the lawful character gave his word the prisoner would not be harmed. Now it says, if any grudge gets out of hand, the DM should try to subtly warn the players. If the grudge develops to a point where it's ruining the adventure, the DM may have a powerful creature interfere. That powerful creature should be out of game. Just freaking talk to your friends. Like, I think that to me would just be absolutely terrible. I don't want to get to a point where I'd have to have some kind of I might have an NPC like kind of, but in occasionally if like it's just in a scene getting a little bit whatever. But to send, let's read the rest of it. The DM may plan an encounter with a gold dragon who tells the player that unless the grudge ends immediately, severe steps will take him. at most the deaths of the offending characters. This is the worst advice in all of D&D, right there. I'm sorry, Molve. May you rest in peace. That is absolutely terrible advice. To punish PCs for what the player is doing in this type of sense is just not good. If a character is playing a character, if a player is playing a character that does something evil in the world, and then the world rears up and goes after them because they did it, they murder some shopkeeper, so you have the townsfolk kind of come and, with pitchforks, that's cool. That's 100% understandable. If people are role-playing their characters and they're just, not getting along, and even if it's hurt, it feels like it's hurting the game overall, but it's role-play type stuff, and it's literally just words between PCs, this is something that I really strongly feel that you need to deal with outside of the game. You just need to say, hey guys, figure out a way where your characters stop this. And if you don't feel like your characters could ever be friendly, just don't act on it in game. Just don't do it. Just don't. That's it. It's a game. I'm telling you not to do it out of game. Killing somebody's character is just not something that I would do to stop that. And luckily, I've never played with people that I would feel I would need to take it that far. Like a conversation outside a game has been enough whenever I've had any weird stuff like that going on. So yeah, that's bad advice. That is very bad advice. Do not send in a dragon to kill PCs because the players are fighting amongst themselves. I mean, you could figure out a way to do it. I mean, I guess now I'm going to try to make it a better advice. If I was going to take this advice but make it work, I would say, when you say a powerful creature intervene, you might have a gold dragon come in the shape of a human and not say, you need to stop this grudge immediately or something's going to happen, but maybe have them do something or be involved in a way that both the players need to work together. Because generally that's what will end up happening, right? If two people are butting heads and then they work together, that starts to slide back into the background. So I would maybe do that, have some kind of powerful creature influence the plot by having them have to work together. But that's a pretty common trope, Just put them somewhere where they have to work together, and then, and that would probably solve it. But killing them, that just feels like whoosh, bad advice. The rest of this just talks about using miniatures, which I think is kind of funny, because they talk about using 1-inch squares and using an overlay and wet erase markers that we do now, So some things never change, right? I think that this book, 99.9% of this book is just great advice. It's how I've always played. It's kind of how I learned how to play. But I can't say I ever did that last thing. So I hate that that's the last piece of advice in there is the terrible one, right? I kind of wish that this could be re-edited so that the last piece of advice is this first part, which is D&D is not a contest between the DM and the players. And everything is balanced, and everybody's here to have fun. That's really what we want, right? You don't want to be a player that makes a character that makes another player not enjoy the game. And you don't want to, as the DM, kill players' characters that they really love because they're doing something that's, that you don't like, roleplay-wise, unless it's really, really disrupting the game. And if it is, again, I wouldn't kill them. I would talk to them outside game, even to the extent of saying, if they say it's just gone too far and my character could absolutely never forgive them, then you could basically say, well, then why are they staying with the group? Maybe you should on your own retire this character. I mean, if it was that extreme, right? Maybe you should retire that character out of this group, and especially back in the day, we used to have lots of different groups going on. You could just move them into a different group or save them for another time or whatever. I mean, maybe let the players make an adult decision, for lack of a better word, to help solve that. But I think the idea of just saying, I'm going to, Gold Dragon comes down, if you guys don't stop fighting, I'm going to kill you. Man, that just feels really bad. So don't do that. Anyways, I may start back at the beginning again and go through some of the other stuff I really like about BX, or I might do something else. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think. Do you like any of this advice? Do you think any of it's good? Do you think besides that last speech, which I don't like, do you think anything that I said here I thought was pretty good was bad that you would never use? Let me know. Like, what kind of things do you guys find interesting about this kind of old school style play? And I'll see you next time.